And then that night, something happened. In that scene where Alien is, where the little creature bursts out of the guy's stomach and runs around the room,
Yes.
um, architecture burst out of my DNA because my
Oh.
dad was an architect. I started finding these houses in Raleigh that were super cool from the 50s, mid-century modern.
Mm.
And they looked vaguely familiar, but I had never been there before. The most famous house in North Carolina, other than Biltmore, had been destroyed in 2001. It was called the Catalano House. It was one of the most innovative houses in the world at the time. It's shaped like a hyperbolic paraboloid, which for mere mortals like me, think of a Pringles potato chip. It just took off, and then people wanted tours. So we did our first tour. About 250 people showed up, and we've done
Wow.
170 tours since then in the last 18 years. Well, that 200,000 pages is now 5 million pages. We have 180 titles of magazines going back 130 years, all
Wow.
downloadable, all text searchable. And our most recent addition to this is a magazine everybody knows of and loves, Dwell. We have the first 15 years of that magazine in our library. Modernist architects were really the first people to make sustainable moves. I mean, it wasn't called green then.
Mm-hmm.
It was just kind of a good idea, something that made sense. Like siting big windows in your house towards the south to get the most sunlight exposure. Figuring a way to shade the house in the summer so that you don't get too much sunlight in the house. They were even designing homes with operable windows that you could open,
Yeah.
that because they studied the wind pattern, they could figure out how to get air through the house to cool it down in the summers.
Hi there, I'm April Paige, breaking down the what, when, where, and how creatives get their inspiration. I'm a big fan of the Cursey words, and I've been a creative for 30 plus years in marketing and fine art. This is where creatives unite to break down the facts of creative life. Buckle up, let's get lost in the world of creativity together.
Everyone to Artist Antics with April, where we talk to creatives about creativity. Today, I am very excited to sit down to talk to George Smart. He is the founder and CEO of US Modernist, the world's largest nonprofit educational archive dedicated to the documentation, preservation, and promotion of modernist residential design. He resides in Raleigh, North Carolina, transplanted to Durham, where I'm located, and a passionate advocate for modernism. George has been one of the nation's leaders in raising awareness to preserve this important architectural movement. He is a frequent speaker to architects, designers, preservationists, real estate agents, and museum groups, and is one of the few people to be bestowed as an honorary AIA by the National American Institute of Architects. As host of the long running US Modernist radio named by Dwell as the number 2 architecture podcast, George has led 400 episodes and interviewed over 680 guests. No pressure on me. US Modernist work has helped to change the way people think about preservation. George and US Modernists have won 20 honors for leadership in preservation, including National AIA's Institute honors for collaborative and professional achievement. George has spoken at AIA national conferences and local groups, California Preservation Foundation, Paul Rudolph Institute, Modernism Week, West Edge, LA, New York School of Interior Design, and Northeastern University, and so many more. But welcome, George. Thank you for taking the time to be with me today. My first question is, where did your love of modern architecture begin? Tell me that story and how it came to, be a passion for you.
Sure. Well, it was a dark and stormy night in January of 2007. It was cold outside, and I was minding my own business,
Yeah.
just Googling, as people do,
Yeah.
thinking about a new house.
Mm.
And so I've always liked modern design, but I wasn't really that thrilled with it. It was just something, you like a song or a movie. And I started finding these houses in Raleigh that were super cool from the 50s, mid-century modern.
Mm.
And they looked vaguely familiar, but I had never been there before. So I put this list together and made some notes. Maybe I would use some of these features in a new house that I was thinking about building. And then that night, something happened. In that scene where Alien is, where the little creature bursts out of the guy's stomach and runs around the room,
Yes.
um, architecture burst out of my DNA because my
Oh.
dad was an architect.
Oh.
And I wanted nothing to do with architecture growing up or
Huh.
even as an adult. But that night in January, this just came spilling out. And the next day, I realized that my dad had taken me to a lot of these houses when I was 5 or 6 years old. So I thought, okay, well, this is fascinating. I'll make a list of, a few and I'll drive around and see where they are. Well, most of them were still standing, but one of them in particular, the most famous house in North Carolina other than Biltmore, had been destroyed in 2001. It was called the Catalano House. It was one of the most innovative houses in the world at the time. It's shaped like a hyperbolic paraboloid, which for mere mortals like me, think of a Pringles potato chip.
Right.
It has those curves in two directions.
Yep.
That's a hyperbolic paraboloid, right? This house was amazing when it came out. People came to it from all over the world to see it. It lasted from 54 to 2001. And so I started asking some of my dad's friends who were architects, he had passed away by then, if they knew of other houses in Raleigh. And they said, sure. If you come over and drive me around, I'll show you where they are. So for several weeks, I'd be driving around these 80-year-old guys hanging out my passenger window with my iPhone, which I think they're going to drop at any moment. And we're slinging around Raleigh in the Mini Cooper, taking photos, and that became a list of about 50 houses. Once that occurred, somebody said, oh, you should make a website. So I made a little dinky website, threw the photos up there. And then all of a sudden, it just took off, and then people wanted tours. So we did our first tour. About 250 people showed up, and we've done
Wow.
170 tours since then in the last 18 years. That's the origin story.
Wow. So many questions and things I have to say to that. Firstly, a lot of my guests, we talk about how important it is to instill in kids that are around you what your passions are so that they, whether they take it on or not, at least they're exposed to it. And who knows, where that will go in the future. So that's great to hear that your dad, was kind of, sharing his passion with you. And then later on, it became a passion for you as well.
Well,
Which
my
is
wife calls it an extended seizure, but apples there.
as sometimes passions can be. But so I love you describing the shape as a Pringles potato chip. We used to have a stadium in Tampa, Florida, back in the day. New one isn't like that now, but I don't know when it changed. I'll have to look that up. But we used to call it the sombrero, and it was absolutely that shape, but in
Right.
a stadium. So that was pretty cool.
Well,
That's
our own Dorton Arena in Raleigh is also a hyperbolic paraboloid.
oh, really? Okay. That tells you how much I go to sports. But
It's a
um,
livestock stadium, so maybe you go out
oh,
for the
yeah,
cows.
no, I definitely wouldn't be there. Uh, so, when you started those tours, like, how do you get 250 people around? You take them on a bus, or what did that look like?
Well, we do bus tours now, twice a year, called Modapalooza, which happens in April and October. The next one is April the 26th. But at the time, what we would do is find a central parking lot and then put people on shuttle buses. So we weren't mobbing the neighborhoods with cars moving from house to house to house. We
Got
really
it.
want to, highlight these houses, but also not create a huge traffic problem for the other neighbors.
So do they get out? Did the owners have a problem with that?
Do they? Oh, well, the people get off the shuttles and go in the
Yeah.
houses and tour the
Oh,
houses. Yes,
Oh,
so
they
they, yeah,
actually tour them. You're not just taking
actually
them to
tour
view
them.
the outside. Oh, that's
It would be
great.
a pretty bad tour if all they
I
got to
was
see was
just
the outside.
I didn't know what I didn't know. That's great. Yeah, that's a lot of coordination with the owners too, I bet, to get them all to comply on the same day. Um,
It's not that hard, actually.
really?
Most of these owners are very happy to show off their houses if it's not going to take them like, 2-day long tour. So we try to only tie up the owners just a couple of hours. It makes it easy.
Yeah. No, that's great. And what you're describing is something we talk about a lot, in all my discussions really about getting into the flow. So I think, you let your passion, move you into exploring and finding out um, what was possible. And in taking that next step, everyone you take as a creative, and I consider this very creative, um, you know you're on the right track when things start coming together, and that's what it sounded like happened to you. Yeah.
Yes. It
Yes.
became very popular very quickly.
Yeah.
We incorporated as a nonprofit in 2009. We
Hmm.
went statewide in 2013, and we went national in 2015.
Wow. That's great. So, my next question is about the project that you're working on for, um, completing the scanning of all the architectural magazines for the US. I know when we talked, when we met at the Smash group, um, how did that project come about?
So, like many things in my life, it comes about from a phone call.
Mm.
I answer my phone. I don't care who's dialing me. I'm going to pick it up. And it's produced all kinds of wonderful things. People all the time complain that, opportunity never knocks. Well, a lot of times we just don't answer the door. And
Mm.
I found that answering the phone is really beneficial most of the time. So I got a random call in 2013 from this realtor in Charlotte who had heard about our organization. And he said, I'm standing in the basement of this house and the architect died. And his employer before that also died. And down here, we've got 24 boxes of all their magazines. They're
Oh.
kind of old and moldy. It looks like some of them are wet. Do you want them? And I thought to myself for a second, well, hell, okay, let's get them. So I went on Craigslist and hired one of those guys you can hire who'll bring you anything in his pickup. Down
Yeah.
to Charlotte, picked up the magazines, came back. Over that weekend, I bought about 5 old Epson eBay scanners, and we set up in my garage and we scanned a couple of 100,000 pages and put them online. And instantly, people were fascinated. And I thought someone else had already done this, but it turns
Hmm.
out we were the first to do it in a way that were actually accessible. You could print the thing, you could download it, you could search by keyword, all of that. Well, that 200,000 pages is now 5 million pages. We have 180 titles of magazines going back 130 years, all
Wow.
downloadable, all text searchable. And our most recent addition to this is a magazine everybody knows of and loves, Dwell. We have the first 15 years of that magazine in our library.
Awesome. So, what is your plan? I know you said you're about 80% complete with the scanning. Like, what does that look like after you're done? How are designers and architects going to access it? Is it going to be a subscription or
Oh,
not
no, no,
not paid
no. They can
or
access it now, actually.
okay.
They, they can access it all along. There's no fee, and there never will be a fee.
Okay.
Because I learned early on that people just don't want to pay for this.
Yeah.
The idea of a paywall is a fantasy that several magazines still embrace, and almost none of them make any money off of it.
Right.
So, so we make revenue off of memberships people can join. Companies can sponsor and advertise to our members. We have donors who are very generous in supporting us and foundation. We also have a tour program that does local tours. We take people to Europe every May. We take people for a really fun trip to Palm Springs every February, and that helps keep the lights on.
Right. So what does the membership look like? What does that include?
So we have about 300 members currently. Membership is $10 a month, very easy. And that gets some discounts on the different programs that we offer during the year.
Got it. So, how did you, I know you are a avid speaker and, radio host, or podcast. I'm not sure if it's on both. Did you transition to become a speaker, out of people asking you, or how did that happen? Did you just start the in-person speaking, and then also same question for the show? Yeah.
I was a management consultant for 30 years.
Mm.
So speaking was a part of what I did in that job. I would make presentations from dozens to hundreds of people in different companies around the country. I've always found that very easy. I've even taught public speaking before. And when I transitioned into running this organization, it was great because I could make these presentations even more fun. I do a keynote called The Accidental Archivist, and I come on the stage and there's music playing. I do this fun thing a la Mr. Rogers, and people just go crazy. And then I customize it for every town that I'm in, so I can show them the modernist houses in their own community they're probably not aware of.
Wow. That's really super cool. So, um, in your radio show, do you have any favorite guests or episodes that you've had so
No,
far?
we just did our 400th show, which is going to be a recap
Hmm.
of some of the people that we've had on. It's been such a pleasure and an honor to talk with people from around the world in different elements of modernism. The architects, landscape architects, owners, builders, real estate agents, suppliers, artists who put art into the houses, all of
Hmm.
that. We've had some funny times. We had one guest that I'll never forget who actually peed on our show. We were talking to him, and he says, "Well, I need to stop and take a little break." And we're like, "Okay." So we figure like he's going to go off and come back, right? Well,
Right.
he did go off like 3 feet. So for the next 4 minutes, we hear him peeing like full on over the headphones.
Oh my
And
God.
and he comes back, and I'm saying, my co-host and engineer Tom, we're thinking like, well, should we say anything? And we decided not to. And he came back like nothing happened, and we just went on.
Oh my gosh. That's crazy. So did he think he was muted or something?
I don't know what he thought. Uh,
Oh, that's so
we got the
funny.
full stereo sense around experience.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I've had the toilet flushing in the background, but not the person I'm talking to. And
I
then
would have much preferred that. Yes.
yes. And random people, in a t-shirt and boxers walking by the background. So
Yeah.
yeah,
But besides incidents like that, um, we have Tom and I have a great time interviewing folks. We try to keep it informative and entertaining because if you've ever listened to an architecture podcast, they can be deadly dull
oh
and
yeah.
and really uh, sometimes they speak in a language that only architects can understand.
Oh
I'm
yeah.
not an architect, and I want our show to appeal to the general public for whom architecture is maybe their ninth or 10th or 11th priority in life, but they still
Yeah.
love it
Hmm.
and they want a place they can go to and be informed and entertained.
Yeah, that's great. So um I understand. I mean, I assume that you are partial towards mid-century modernism, but I'm curious, are there any other favorite types of architecture that you like?
Well, I'm partial towards modernism, no matter when it is.
Okay.
It really started up in the late 20s, early 30s. Influences in Europe that came to us, and then Frank Lloyd Wright and Louis Sullivan, others who were already here. And it reached its peak in the late 50s, early 60s. A lot of the buildings that we're trying to save now are from that period. And then by 1970, in the early 70s, modernism was out of favor. The oil crisis made the construction of the large buildings very expensive. It was going on at the time. And modernism just kind of vanished as a
Gotcha.
style and didn't start picking back up again in appreciation until the 90s or the 2000s.
Got it. So, what do you think about some of the new types of buildings, like barn dominiums, the shipping containers, the tiny houses? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I like a variety of styles. I like classical architecture
Mm,
too. I think it's great that people are experimenting with new kinds of materials, new kinds of building blocks like the shipping containers. Up in Asheville, for instance, there's been a restaurant up there, I think 10 years now. It's built entirely of shipping containers, which is a really cool experience
yep.
to go and eat there. Um, the the modernism has seeped its way into almost every house. So, for example, back in the day, the open floor plan, where your living room flows into your dining room, flows into your kitchen, that was radical. That was like the Bitcoin of its era, right? And now almost every house, no matter how it looks on the outside, is
Yes.
made to look that way on the inside.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah. So, how important is sustainability in the future, do you think, with energy efficiency, renewable energy, sustainable materials, all of that? Like, I know with all the changes in the world that are happening, um, not sure, where that's going to lead us as far as being efficient and renewable, but just curious in your thoughts with that.
Modernist architects were really the first people to make sustainable moves. I mean, it wasn't called green then.
Mhm.
It was just kind of a good idea, something that made sense. Like siting big windows in your house towards the south to get the most sunlight exposure. Figuring a way to shade the house in the summer so that you don't get too much sunlight in the house. They were even designing homes with operable windows that you could open,
Yeah.
that because they studied the wind pattern, they could figure out how to get air through the house to cool it down in the summers. And those were remarkably comfortable for the people that were living in them at the time. Later on, after the energy crisis of the 70s, people started looking at, how much oil was in the materials, and then later on in the 90s, what's the effect of carbon dioxide on the atmosphere? We're in a political situation now where the dominant thought is that climate change is just a myth. And so we're going to have to deal with the fact that all these natural disasters are becoming more frequent and
Mm,
more severe. And eventually, they will get so bad that something will have to be done. But I hope it's not too late by then to
right.
reverse the course.
Yeah, the building codes and all of that go through, all the scrutiny when you're building, but so, I know I used to live in South Tampa and I lived in a bungalow type home there, which I love, the architecture of. Love that and craftsman style. Uh, just curious because, in South Tampa, it's like the peninsula is like a bowl. So a lot of the houses in the middle, which is where I was, were 9 feet under sea level. And there's water, all around. And there's been a lot of hurricanes that have come recently. And so I know that there they are building, requiring new builds to be sea level and higher. So that at
Yes.
least that's happening, that I've seen in my own experience. And the city, redid all the culverts in the peninsula so things wouldn't flood so much. It was a big project and they were very proud of it and it did work. So that was good because previous to that, a heavy rain, you'd see cars floating down the street.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But if you were to give someone advice, whether they're getting a new home or kind of researching what styles they like, and or somebody who wants to get into design or architecture, what would be the first steps that you would tell them, to start?
Well, those are two entirely different scenarios.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, one is if you're trying to go into it as a profession, and
Yep.
the other is if you're looking to have a new house, right?
Sure.
So which one of those do you want me to?
Answer both or pick the one you want. Yeah.
Okay. I'll say about getting a new house because that's the most common situation. So people already kind of know what they like, right? So I get messages at least once a month from one half of a couple, and that half is a modernist, and they love it. And their other half is not a modernist,
You're right.
right? And they're writing me like, "Dear Abby, dear Ms. Manners, how do I convince this other person to come over to the bright side of modernism?" Because they just don't like it. They think modernism is cold and unwelcoming
Mm,
and and all kinds of other things. And so I'll ask them, it's like, okay, well, how many nights has this other person spent in a modernist house? And they go, well, none, right? Is always the answer. I said, well, here's your best bet. Rent a modernist house, an Airbnb, something not like over the top, but just really cool, kind of middle of the road, maybe a
yep.
mid-century, maybe a new one, maybe something overlooking a body of water somewhere or a great view,
Yeah.
and spend at least 3 nights in there. And most of the time, that's all the brainwashing you need because people wake up and they can feel the vibe is just
Right.
different from a regular house.
Yeah.
The way the light comes in, the way sound plays in the house, um, even down to like, the way the coffee smells as it comes from the kitchen, the bedroom feels different for some reason in a modernist design. So
Yeah.
that's the pathway towards creating a compromise that is still a modern result.
Yeah. No, that's great. So when you're feeling those feelings, overall description of how it makes you feel, like calm or connected with nature or outside or freeing, like how would you describe that overall feeling?
It's a great feeling of beauty, actually.
Mm,
Um, it's a feeling of relaxation, of stress going away, of optimism. One of the things that modern architecture attempted to do, and I think was successful with for a long time, was creating the impression that the future is going to be bright, right? We're all going to
yes.
wear shades. We're going to have flying cars and two-way wrist radios.
Yep.
And we got the wrist radios. We got those devices. We didn't get the flying cars or the laser guns or things like
Yeah.
that yet. But it was going to be great. This was that post-World War II optimism, the go-go of the 50s.
Mm,
And these houses and structures tend to evoke that, in those buildings. Now, on the other end, they were, of course, they're bad classical buildings and they're bad modern buildings. Some of them were
mm,
built and just didn't work very well.
right.
But that's just the nature of construction.
Yeah. No, that's great. So do you have a favorite story, like, of an architect of I know you told us one of your episodes, but I'm thinking more of, like, something inspiring or some kind of house that you saw, I'm not gonna choose it for you, like, what's your favorite story to date about
Sure.
architecture? Yeah.
Well, sure. Um, One of my favorite stories is about that house I mentioned earlier, the 1954 Catalano house.
Mhm.
So Eduardo Fernando Catalano was from Argentina. He was a rock star professor. He was recruited to NC State to teach architecture at the hotshot school they had, still have. And they recruited him, and he came up and he built this house, and it was just tremendous. No one had ever seen anything like it. And he finished it in the summer of 1954.
Mm.
And in the fall of 1954, we had something called Hurricane Hazel go through North Carolina. It was one of the most devastating hurricanes that we've ever had. And Raleigh at the time was only about 70,000 people.
Mm.
So the Raleigh Police Department decided they were going to get those good old boys in the black and whites, and they were going to run around to every house and check
Oh,
on the homeowners,
oh.
right? So Catalano's house was actually unaffected by the hurricane. Catalano's sitting out in the front porch, and this policeman drives up in the car, pulls up, gets out, goes over to Mr. Catalano, and of course, this is the hyperbolic paraboloid. This is looking
Yeah.
like the Pringles potato chip. So the cop goes over to him and says, Mr. Catalano, I am so sorry what happened to your house. Because he thought it had been whumped down by the storm. And that's just the way that it looked. And so Catalano told the story for years. And I still do it in my talks and show the photos of the house, right? It was just that unusual.
I would have said, what's wrong?
Right,
What do you mean? What's wrong? That's funny. Oh, that's awesome. If you only had a cell phone to record that.
right, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, that's funny. That's great. Thank you for that. So, I've been talking to everybody about AI and just
Mhm.
wanted your take on in regards to architecture. What are your thoughts on AI and what do you think about its use now and where you might think it goes in the future?
Well, AI has already changed things. It's
Mm.
changed things for writing. It's
Oh, yes.
changed things for organization of data completely. AI is going to be able to do things that took weeks or months in architecture. Um, for instance, like if you have a hotel, you've got to design the stairwells, right? Where
Mhm.
people exit in case of a fire. Stairwells are not rocket science. So AI can learn how to design a pretty good stairwell or a pretty good bathroom for that somebody else doesn't have to do.
Right.
That's going to take somebody's job from doing that. But at
Right.
the same time, architecture firms, if they learn how to use AI, nothing's going to replace human creativity yet
Correct.
for the
Yes.
overall design concept. It's just
Mhm.
going to replace some of the drudgery.
Yes.
In some respects, this is the same kind of fear that came about in the early 80s
Yeah.
when personal computers came about, and then the
Absolutely.
late 80s when computer aided design came about.
Mhm.
Um, Now, the difference between then and now, AI is a lot smarter and a lot more resourceful, and is pulling in what they've scraped off, the entire internet to make its decisions.
Yeah.
So I think that firms have got to make an investment in learning this stuff,
Yep.
just like the firms had to make an investment in computer-aided design back in the late 80s, early 90s.
Yeah, no, amen to that. And I think, it's just like anything. TV replaced radio, email replaced, snail mail, but we still have all those things. So
Yeah.
it's not going to go away. It's just an ad. And, to everyone freaking out about it, it's just going to be another paradigm shift after AI. There's going to be something else after that. And
Well, the danger of AI is when it changes from being an information system to being a decision-making system.
well, there you go. Yeah.
I
But
mean,
even
when
then, I think, it's in its infancy right now. We don't know what it's gonna grow up to be, but I
I know what it's going to grow up to be.
do
This is
you?
Skynet from Arnold Schwarzenegger, full on Terminator. I mean,
Oh, don't say that, George. Um, yeah, I don't know. I feel grateful for it. I know it's a double-edged sword for a lot of people, but even as a marketer, I'm a senior marketer in my day job and I use it every day for all kinds of stuff.
right,
Like you said, like building the stairwell. Do I have to do that? No. I can get AI to do it for me. Do I accept it as is? Never. I always change it and customize it to what I need.
right.
but
You
it
are the
just,
decision maker.
that's right. And it,
You are the final arbiter. But when we start saying, okay, AI, make me a stairwell, and that's it, we don't even bother to look at
yeah,
it again, that's when we're going to get a lot of unintended consequences.
yeah, for sure.
Because AI doesn't know often when it's making a little mistake or it's making a big mistake.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. So, where would you like to see architecture in the future go? Like, I don't want to prompt you. Like, it could be anything as far as, archival materials, design itself, the tools you use, schooling, groups, your show. Like, where do you want to see things go in the future?
Well, again, I'm not an architect, so I can't really speak to the profession as a whole.
Yeah, but
But
you
in
know a lot
terms,
about it.
well, some, but
Yeah.
really, really not. I mean, I'm very respectful of the people that have spent years in school and studio and have to learn a tremendous amount of information to make buildings that are both, um, spacious and safe and functional for
Yeah.
us.
Yeah.
Now, for what we're doing with the archiving part, we want to eventually have every magazine in architecture and design ever published in the US. We want to use AI to create better searches for that so that you can go in, let's say you're trying to find your grandfather's house. It
Mm,
was mid-century modern in Ohio. You want to be able to easily go in there and have the AI find a reference to the house, find photos of the house from different publications, maybe find a history of the architect that designed the house, and then what happened to the house since then,
mm.
and give that to you in a concise kind of report that is going to be accurate. Um, that way, we continue to address the prime directive of what we're all about, which is keeping these houses from being destroyed. Our motto is you can't save something unless you know where it is and why it's important.
Yeah, no, that's great. And, I could see that for any house, really. Like, if I were buying a home and I had the ability to say, hey, here's the address, give me a report on anything you can find on this home, that would be worth its weight in gold to me with the evaluation and buying a home. So,
Well, that exists now on Zillow and other Redfin and all these. You can get
no,
the,
but it doesn't have the architecture,
no,
the
they all
architect
ignore that.
doesn't have, who's lived there, it doesn't have, any kind of historical information about what's happened at the house. Like it could have been in a war or, stuff like
Right.
that. Yeah. So that's what I'm
Eventually,
talking about. Yeah.
we'll have all that.
Yeah.
And sites like Zillow will start stealing from us to
Mm.
update their reports, which will be great because, we will have done our job
Yeah.
in getting it out to more people.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, my last question, do you have anything you want to announce to our audience and any last comments?
Sure. People can get on our newsletter at usmodernist.org or ncmodernist.org, which is our North Carolina site. That
Okay.
comes out every Monday. It announces all our upcoming, we have happy hours every month. We have an architecture movie series that runs
Oh,
through the winter and spring. We have the Modapalooza tours in April and September. We have these other tours to Palm Springs in Europe. They can find out how to join. They can see about the history of the organization, and they can take a deep dive as long as they want into hundreds of architects and 23,000 houses all around the country.
yeah, that's awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time today.
Yes,
And
thank you.
yes, and I will put all your information and the sites and all your contact info in the description for everyone. But thank you so much.
It's been a real pleasure. I appreciate
Yeah.
your interest.
Yes, thank you.
If you haven't already, please like and subscribe. Feel free to nominate yourself or someone you know as our next guest. Thank you for being a part of our creative community. Stay inspired and keep shining bright.